Hello and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast, part of the Institute for Liberal Values. This is where we discuss how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In this week's podcast, we'll begin the first of a two-part series on a concept called the spiral of silence, which is an attempt to explain why people don't speak up even when they know dangerous things like ideological tolerance and even hatred are well afoot. This is a problem for democracy because it can create an environment wherein people will go along with potentially dangerous opinions rather than challenge them. In part two, we will discuss how this concept can apply to people withholding even objectively true factual information in order to protect the interests of an in-group, for example, a country, a company, a university, or even a set of friends. This has the potential to block valuable information, which thereby impoverishes the public debate. Okay, hello everybody. Today we are going to talk about self-censorship. I'm here with my usual co-host, Elizabeth Spivak, Professor of Psychology. And the paper we're looking at is called Extending the Spiral of Silence, Theorizing a Typology of Political Self-Censorship. Care to introduce it, Elizabeth?
Sure. So in this study, the researchers, this is a little bit different than what we've done before, because this is actually not a psychology paper. This is a communication paper. So they interviewed Americans that were living in what they called politically divided communities, and they had a metric for that. And they were investigating an alternative hypothesis. This was not their original goal to do this particular paper. They were interviewing people in general about actually how they talked to people with whom they disagreed. So this emerged out of the data, this paper. So there's another paper about their original investigation. And they were interested in, as the title says, extending the spiral of silence. And I thought that I would actually just read a definition of the spiral of silence from the original the person who originally described it. In her original conceptualization, people monitor the media, and at that time that was not social media, it was like television and radio, for cues about majority opinion. And fearing social isolation, they remain silent about any disagreement, which starts the spiral because that reinforces beliefs about the majority opinion, because as minority opinions don't get expressed, then there's further belief that there are no sort of other opinions. So it's sort of it's a self-reinforcing system.
So rather like fashion, in other words. You know, like if we look at the 1980s and we look at all the kind of the big hairdos and stuff, they all look a bit silly now. Why were they so popular back then? Well, it was because people would watch MTV, I guess. I think MTV was in the 1980s.
Oh, I had the big Farrah Fawcett hair.
I bet you did.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. With all the feathering curls all around oh, yes.
It seemed like such a positive time to be alive. Everybody, like when you watch 1980s movies, everybody seems so happy and it seems so positive. And then you go into the 1990s and it's all this kind of mopey, grungy, Nirvana kind of, everything gets depressive. But anyway, I mean, as somebody in the 1980s or the 1990s or equally today, when you're thinking about, well, how do I present myself to the world, just in terms of how you look, you would survey the media. You would look at, fashionable celebrities. How do they dress? How can I emulate the way that they dress in order to, grab some of their esteem, grab some of their attractiveness for myself? And that explains why fashion looks differ from one decade to the next and can look very, very silly. I mean, if we look back to the 19th century, things look deeply silly with all the wigs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But
everybody plays along.
Yeah, in the same process that we're playing along with today, right? And people do that with opinions. with, political opinions, with philosophy. What do you believe? And so one of the reasons why, for example, woke ideas have spread, I would argue, is because people survey the media. They see celebrities coming out with certain arguments. They see those arguments as fashionable, much in the same way that they see certain clothes or hairstyles as fashionable, and they adopt them.
Well, conservative ideas too, right?
Oh,
So you're
absolutely.
watching those particular, again, staying abreast of that. Social media, I mean, it's an algorithm, right? So you see more and more of the same thing. And again, this spiral of silence theory was, like 1970s. So it was, way before, social media. And so anything like this would only have been exacerbated with time as people, get their information in part fed to them through an algorithm, right? So now we're not even flipping through channels, looking for things. It's just popping up and encouraging us to read or watch or whatever, the next thing that's similar to what we just did. So the researchers, and I think that you and I would agree with this, very like the second sentence in the paragraph. One of the reasons that they say that they're so interested in this is because people who talk to people that they disagree with are more likely to participate politically, be tolerant of others' viewpoints, and have faith in democracy and empathy towards others. So there's value in talking with people that we disagree with. And so that, again, that was their original thing, was they were wondering, how do you talk to people that you disagree with? And then what they found, of course, was that people described why they didn't even
Well,
talk to
this
people.
this is before we go any further. I mean, just to tie this into who we are, and what the left was always supposed to be. At least the majority of the left in places like Britain and America, is liberal. What does liberal mean? I fundamentally, yeah, you have freedom to express opinions, even ones that I might deeply dislike, or perhaps even feel are hateful, maybe even dangerous. But you have the right to express those opinions. That is the liberal system that we are supposed to be existing within. I mean, that's what a liberal democracy was supposed to be. And so it's those liberal democracies where people are able to express themselves, that really have been the vanguard against authoritarianism, against people, using power to abuse people, to prevent them from speaking. And then because they can't speak, then all kinds of atrocities can be permitted because nobody can speak out against it. So it's fundamentally what liberalism is, and fundamentally why liberalism has been successful and why it's so needed. Why we need to really protect it. Okay, good. So yes, obviously that is a good thing. If
Yes,
people can talk to
yes,
people who they disagree with, and I can have friends who are conservative Christians, for example. I do have friends that are
yes.
conservative Christians. Don't agree with them on everything. Don't agree with them on quite a lot. Think that if they were to have their way, society would be worse off as a consequence. But it doesn't follow that I think that they're evil, or I think that they should be shut up. And I think
Or
when we
that their
have
ideas don't have value, as in contributing to, you
quite,
know, this the thinking about problem solving and brainstorming and that kind of stuff. We need all of this. We
well,
need different perspectives.
yeah, I mean, certainly I know that conservative Christians do have something to offer. And the reason I know that is because I've spent time with them, and I've been to their communities, and I've met them, and I've drank tea with them. They don't drink beer, unfortunately, a lot of them. I'm sure some of them do in private.
I'm sure some do. Yes.
Well, the
Um,
ones that I met, that was their own. Their serious failing was that they didn't have a beer in the evening. Apart from that, they were lovely, and they were very happy. They raised their kids well. Hardworking, productive, kind, decent people, and their communities function really, really well. Before that, I had always sort of demonized these people in my own head, and I'm happy to admit that I'm wrong and that they do have something to offer. Because if they didn't, they wouldn't all be so happy and lovely.
yes.
Um, okay, so
Um, okay. So again, the spiral of silence is sort of based on this. The idea is that, that people are silent out of fear. They silence themselves to avoid public censure. So they try to get a reading on what's the majority opinion, and they then self-censor in order to, to protect themselves from perhaps, you know, uh, ostracism or something,
Or even worse, right?
or even worse. Yes.
Imagine if you're
So
a gay person and you have to go on a business trip to Saudi Arabia.
exactly. Now, let me just and we should be clear that even these authors even describe that there are certainly good reasons to self-censor sometimes, and that there's certainly that this is not to say that that all fears are unwarranted, right? That there's just because just because you're paranoid doesn't mean that nobody's watching you, right? Like there's sometimes some really good reasons to self-censor, and so the authors do mention that. What they're really talking about, though, is people who um, uh, stay silent, um, and don't share what they believe to be minority views, which then harm society. And one of their points here, and this is in psychology, they call this pluralistic ignorance. When we it may in fact be that you're not in the minority, right? That there's actually as many of you as there are then, or who knows, it could be even more. But because you don't, because this opinion doesn't get expressed, you stay in this state of pluralistic ignorance. And again, the spiral of silence, is self-perpetuating.
And the data for critical social justice is actually really clear on this. At most, they're 12% of the population of the United States of America. And yet, because they're so loud and aggressive, this illusion is created that there's far more of them than there actually is. Whereas most people, I think there's a much higher proportion of them within academia, for example.
Right.
But I certainly don't think it's a majority. But people won't speak out against these people because they presume that they are far more numerous than they actually are. And so then that
Now,
kind of
isn't it
perpetuates.
about the same percentage on the extreme other end?
Yep.
Yeah.
So about
Yeah.
the same percentage of alt-right and critical social justice
Authoritarian
types.
left.
Yeah,
Yeah.
authoritarian
Yeah.
leftists, if you want to call it that. And we should probably dive into this at some point because there's really good. Well, I don't know if it's really good. I'll have to get you to evaluate it first. But there seems to be good evidence that the psychological profiling for alt-right and critical social justice, authoritarian leftists is very similar. So that they're similar kinds of people. Certainly from a philosophical point of view, and I've said this on the podcast before, their arguments are very, very, very similar.
Mm-hmm.
They both believe in white supremacy. That is that societies like Britain and America are ruled over by white people. The key difference is that the critical social justice lot believes that this has been done by nefarious, malevolent oppression, whereas the alt-right types think that this proves some kind of superiority of white people. But they both believe that white people have achieved a kind of superiority. And again, I suggested before, if that was true, and I don't think it's true, I think it's ridiculous, but if that was true, in either case, then that would infer that there would be some adaptive quality to white people that is missing elsewhere. So it's kind of like narcissism or inverse narcissism.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or inverse patriotism. Why is America so powerful the world over? Well, it's because we're really evil and the rest of it. Well, it's because we're all the best. You're arriving at the same place, basically, albeit through very, very, very slightly different, ends. Good.
Okay, so do we want to talk about the categories of self-censorship that the authors identified.
Should we first quickly define? We have done already in a roundabout way, but we might use this term and it might not be recognized. So, quickly define opinion climate. Because
Sure,
the paper
go ahead.
uses that. So,
Yeah.
as we were talking about, people survey their surroundings. They try to get a gauge of what other people are thinking. They may be correct, they may be incorrect, they may be partly correct, partly incorrect, which is most of us, I think. And then they adjust their behavior in different ways in order to protect themselves, to protect others, in order to stop negative consequences. So, to give you an example of this, in Tokyo, at my youngest son's daycare, there is a foreign parent. So there's 100% Caucasian kid who goes to a daycare with all these Japanese kids. My son is mixed. And, this guy who goes there, he has an American accent, seems like a really nice guy. But I deliberately avoided anything really much beyond the pleasantries with him. I'm deliberately like, I didn't know anything about him. Superficially looking at him, there was no reason for me to be suspicious of the guy. But having been burnt so many times around a minority, not even a majority, a minority of woke Americans who have just, tried to go for me and make stuff up about me, I'm just naturally, I'm not, I've surveyed the environment and I thought, I don't know whether he's woke or not, but I'm not going to take the risk. And so I kind of kept him at arm's length. And it wasn't rude to him, but I didn't really want to risk it, right? And then anyway, eventually we got talking and I found out that he's got all of the same fears as me. It's really the same as me. And he was careful with me because he thought I might be one of them as well.
Right.
So we'd both done the same thing. We'd both encountered Westerners. We've encountered this certain type of Westerner who would seize upon social justice issues in order to, I would say, dishonestly advance their own social status, as well as just bully people. We've encountered it. We've lost friends because of it. And so we're cautious. It's not that we know that every Westerner is going to be like that. We know that they won't be, but the opinion climate is such that we're not prepared to take the risk. Why would we?
Well, and again, these authors specifically recruited people that that would be in an opinion climate that the researchers believed would be somewhat would sort of get people to respond in the way that you're talking about, that they would not actually know for sure, who they might encounter, at the store or, so they're always judging, the situation, which is one of the things that the themes that came out in this article, which was, that they're saying that that the spiral of silence is, which is what was this extending the spiral of silence, so that
Right.
so because they found sort of as a general pattern, which we'll get into the details here in a second, but that people were doing more than simply checking in with the media, or maybe as we were talking about social media, but that they were also doing it this at a more what they called fine-grained sort of level, where they were actually figuring out what kind of network, what kind of situation am I in now, a much more situational kind of analysis in order to decide whether or not they should self-censor. So although it looks a lot like the spiral of silence, which is a much more sort of umbrella kind of thing, that it's also happening in this sort of boots on the ground, everyday interaction kind of level. Same idea, but at a more fine-grained.
Yeah, so we've got this concept of networked silence, right?
Yes.
So the example they use is liberal women in Texas, presumably married to conservative men, who would not voice their liberal opinions in front of their conservative husbands, but would do so on Facebook with other liberal women married to conservative men in Texas.
Yeah, so that actually is not this study. I just want to be clear, just in case somebody was looking for that. So that is, I guess it's Van
Van
Duyn.
Duyn, 2018.
Duyn? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2018 and
So
21.
yeah, so that study, I had that study too. That was one
Oh,
I considered for us to read. It was really interesting. One of the things that that they talked about, and I wrote this down actually so that I could share it, was the that this Van Duyn found was that women described their community as a nice community, and then maybe a sentence or so later would say, but there's some hate crimes here. They described things like, people being run off the road because of a bumper sticker, but they live in a nice community. That their community is safe and then also hostile. That they were constantly weighing what they thought was their ethical obligations, with the risk maybe to their career, their relationships, and the risks of being exposed. So that's also a really cool paper, again, specific to these women in Texas who formed a sort of a little secret society, where they got together for wine and cheese or something like that, and then had their little Facebook group. I think in a barn. I think it was actually in somebody's barn, and they would get together and whatever, play cards or whatever it was they and essentially talk freely about their political views, which were less conservative than those in the community. So it was really interesting how they described this community as a place that they wanted to be because they felt safe, and then at the same time that they felt it was hostile. And so that's this idea of networked silence. When I'm in my group of women friends that are less conservative, I share my opinion. I feel very comfortable. We're drinking our wine and having our cheese, and on our Facebook group. But then when I'm in a different network, I'm more careful about what I say, and I don't share those same views. So again, it's sort of a more micro version of the spiral of silence, where we choose how much to self-censor depending on the immediate environment, and what we believe are the majority views in our immediate environment, as opposed to the environment as a whole.
So you might have experienced this if you're, again, if you're somebody who's listening to this, you're probably very wary of critical social justice. You've maybe been burnt by it a few times, like Elizabeth and I have been. If you are someone who hasn't spoken out, then you'll know what it's like, right? You're wandering around the office, you're interacting, you're smiling. Hello, hi, how are you? Oh, great, yeah. How was your weekend? Yeah, wonderful. And yet you're worried about being misinterpreted, about somebody jumping on you and saying, actually, that's a microaggression. And, you live in that kind of environment where people will do that. And so you have this silence, you don't necessarily, you think, you look at the lists of microaggressions, you memorize them, you think, right, okay, how can I make sure that I'm not going to make this misstep? But then when you're outside of that environment, when you're maybe with another one of your colleagues, 2 or 3 colleagues, who also exist in that environment, but you've now gone to the pub and you know that you're all kind of thinking similarly, you might say, God, it's awful the amount that we have to walk on eggshells, and isn't it dreadful, and isn't it really stressful? Oh yeah, and it's terrible, and these ideas, critical social justice and microaggressions, and then the silence will disappear. So it's not like you're censoring all of the time. It's context specific. If you're in the barn or if you're in the pub, or huddled over a photocopier machine looking, you will open your mouth, but you don't feel comfortable opening your mouth at all times.
Okay, so do you want to talk about the three categories that they
Yeah,
found?
so we've got I put them down as A, B, and C. So we've got
Okay.
total, which is
So that was the least common, and it
yeah,
was essentially where people just made it a uh, you know they made a decision that across all relationships they would not talk about certain things. So this was just, it didn't matter where they were, it didn't matter who they were talking to. It was, I do not share my opinions about certain things, in this case politics. So in order to preserve relationships, in order to avoid hurting others, and also people reported because of the essentially the futility of sharing those opinions, they made it a rule that they simply didn't do it in any context. So that was sort of the author's report, that sort of a guiding principle people adopted.
this is very common amongst my grandparents' generation in
Mm.
English in England. So very kind of prim and proper English, very repressed, buttoned up. They wouldn't express any political opinion at all. And to the extent that interacting with them was really, really, really boring, because it was all just small talk all of the time. They policed their speech so much because they didn't want to offend other people, that having a conversation with them, with my grandmother, for example, was actually quite difficult. With my great aunt, still is quite difficult. Hello, Michael. How are you? Did you have a nice day? Yes, Grandma, I'm a bit annoyed with these, I don't know, Islamic fundamentalists.
Mhm.
Oh, well, I'm not sure I know very much about that. That kind of thing. So that would be
So
total.
and yeah, and the authors here, I don't know that I necessarily agree with this, because again, these are communication researchers, so they're taking a little bit of liberty here, but basically they're considering it a trait. So again, in psychology, I don't think that we would consider this, a trait. We can, but they're essentially saying that they've that it's a protective response, um, and that while it might have begun with a state, that they've adopted it now as a habit. It's sort of become part of their, sort of what you're describing, sort of part of their personality. So people reported that sometimes they adopted this policy because of maybe a falling out or a bad experience where they shared their opinion and it turned out badly. Over and over again, people sort of mentioned that, you know, um, uh, that nothing would be gained and only harm could be done. So they don't want to hurt people that they know. Um, they want to protect their relationships. So a political discussion, with an outgroup member might actually harm sort of, a general like peaceful relations in the neighborhood. So I mean, one of the things that people said was, let's just keep the peace and everything. It's not going to change. What else? I was looking for another little quote here, but these sort of fear of social isolation, of damaging relationships, and of the emotional cost of a potential conflict. And they found this pretty much equally, although it was the least common form of self-censorship. They did find it pretty equally among Democrats and Republicans. So both people from both sides of the aisle were reporting that they felt uncomfortable just sort of ever sharing their opinion. They just made it a rule. I'm just not doing it.
It must be an extremely difficult position to maintain, right? I mean, because as human beings, we tend to want to express ourselves, and
Yeah.
yeah, so total self-censorship in that regard must be very difficult. Though I guess
Um, yeah.
people in authoritarian countries have to do that constantly, right? Pretty
True.
much, yeah.
True. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think the default is sort of to share with people, it's one way of, building relationships, right? Even relationships that aren't, particularly intimate. there's still a certain amount of sharing that, that builds, common ground, empathy, whatever. So.
Yeah, funnily, like for me, like a lot of my friends that I've developed in recent years, have been people that I disagree with on a lot of things, but I really just enjoy getting in it with them, getting into the debate with them, and them too, obviously vice versa. And I've changed my opinions; they've changed their opinions on certain things as a consequence. So those kind of relationships are also possible, but
Yeah.
not if you totally self-censor. Um, which would make it really difficult to develop any in-depth knowledge on anything political, really.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that's something that I see in my students is uh, what I perceive, and this may not be true. What I perceive is a general lack of enthusiasm for building knowledge. That they don't value knowledge, in terms of just sort of, having a knowledge base for themselves and really building, as you say, sort of, a well articulated sort of, base of knowledge that they could then use to communicate well about, if they do have a firm belief, you know.
This isn't the exact quote. Immanuel Kant didn't talk in this precise way, but he did say something along the lines of, if well, first of all, he valued being an intellectual. He valued being a philosopher. Being somebody who was able to interrogate ideas and make valuable contributions to society, to knowledge, to whatever. He thought that was a good thing, and I agree. But he made this observation that if you want to get there, and so he was talking about himself as well, if you want to get to that point, you have to fall off your horse a few times, right? You have to make an idiot out of yourselves a few times. To give you the example of learning to one of my hobbies, snowboarding. You look at the Shaun Whites of the world, one of the greatest snowboarders of all time, multiple Olympic champion, so on and so forth. There was never, there would have always been a stage when he was the worst person on the slope, right? Where he was falling over, making an idiot out of himself, getting bruised. You can't go from being a novice in anything to being an expert without making loads of mistakes, be that a piano, cooking, a psychologist, a philosopher. You can't get there, right? And so what's really sad is that and I think I agree. And again, okay, we'll hedge this by saying this is anecdotal, but I think I can be fairly confident that we're right here. That students seem to be self-censoring to such an extent that they don't get into this exchange of ideas, and they don't have the opportunity to fall over, to make an idiot out of themselves, and therefore they can't grow.
Mm-hmm.
Unless, of course, they form their own communities within which they can, but that seems
But
to be
then
getting more
they're
difficult.
recycling the same ideas. They're not
Right, and then
getting,
it's
yeah.
siloed, unless they're one of the rare groups of people where they come to this kind of conclusion where they think, wow, not all conservatives are evil, and not all liberals are evil either. And sometimes I am going to be wrong. But you just don't. Yeah, you don't seem to encounter students who do that very often. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
there are a few, but
Yes. Certainly not en masse anymore. That's for sure.
it's really a real
Okay.
betrayal of the university, of what the
Yes.
university was supposed to be, right? Because
Yes.
that was the whole point.
Yes.
Even
And
going back to ancient Greece.
it's why, certainly why I and you got, I'm sure you also got into this profession,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah. And it's very disheartening, demeaning even, to be a little bit in this profession right now. Okay, so we have total
Abusive,
self-silence. Abusive,
abusive.
yeah. We have total self-silencing, and then we have misrepresentative self-silencing. And this was more fear motivated. And this included intentional deception, overt lying, pretending to agree. And again, it was sort of done in this sort of networked, depending on, it's not like somebody made a habit of this. They did it in particular groups. They pretended to agree. They complied. And let's see. So here's a little quote. They didn't always overtly lie. They also just sort of misrepresented their beliefs more subtly, or pretended maybe that they didn't have, I haven't thought about that, or I don't know anything about that. And I don't know about you, but this is what happens all the time with me being canceled, is people just deny, I never even knew any of that was going on. I didn't see those emails, that kind of stuff. So it's a way of not sharing. It's an excuse. I know that's part of it. It's an excuse for not contacting me or whatever, even if they did disagree what was going on. But if they were in agreement and they believed that I should have been, whatever, canceled, then they don't want to say that to me either. So they'll maybe lie or obfuscate or say that they don't have enough information. So here is one person from a Democrat-leaning independent from Ohio explained, I would even agree with stuff that I don't agree with necessarily, just to end the discussion, right? Jim, a Republican from Nevada, approached contentious discussions by remaining falsely neutral, explaining, I wouldn't really express my full views. I would try to be more vague about what I actually think. Sort of a misrepresentative self-silencing in order to, just sort of obfuscate.
And let's be clear here. There's a lot of pressure put on you to do this. Like a lot of social pressure will be put on you, and you will all feel this. Again, if you've encountered critical social justice types, they will make a claim about somebody, perhaps themselves, being the victim of whatever kind of bigotry they claim to be the victim of. And you in that position, you might have no idea. You might, I don't know whether you're the victim of bigotry or not. Maybe you were, maybe you weren't. That's where you are. You haven't had the time to investigate the claim. That will probably be me most of the time when I encounter these complaints. Or maybe you might know that this person is kind of inventing bigotry all of the time, and you know that they're nefarious. They're nefarious, right? So what do you do in that situation where they confront you? Oh my God, I've been the victim of this and this. I know. What do you think? What do you say in that situation? Do you challenge them? Do you say, well, actually, where's your evidence for this? It's a very difficult thing to do, right? How dare you say that to me? I've just been made. And that's the kind of thing that these people do. So they put in immense pressure on people to validate them, to misrepresent, and for you to self-censor. They use immense moral pressure for you to do that, even though either you don't know, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, or you know that they're nefarious. Perhaps even they've lashed out at you before. So critical social justice types exploit this. So we've done misrepresentative, lying about your actual position, being dishonest, claiming you don't know anything about it, when you might do, or saying, oh yeah, that's great. I mean, another example would be somebody coming up to me in private and saying, oh, well done for standing up against these critical social justice types. And then the next thing you know, they're in the lunchroom, in the cafeteria, and they're going, oh yeah, absolutely, I'm going along with all of this. So I've encountered that too. So both silence and outright lying. And again, just to be clear, we're not saying that you're a terrible person for doing this.
No, we're saying you're a normal person for doing this. Completely normal.
I would argue that the people who are pressuring you, who are the aggressive social justice people who are coming and saying, you must validate what I'm saying, otherwise I'm going to be, I would say they're pretty awful. And I would say maybe you should, from a kind of moral point of view, not lie, not pretend you know nothing, and stand up to them. because that's the only way that they're really going to be stopped and your environment is going to be rescued. But I'm certainly not condemning you for not doing that. I mean, I know what the pressure feels like. I've been pressured in that way too. We get it, right?
Right. Okay, so we had total self-silencing, and misrepresentative self-silencing. And then the third category that the researchers found was selective self-censoring. And this was more specific to fear of being isolated from people close to them. So it could be family, could be neighbors, could be coworkers that are necessary parts of their lives. So these are not people that they could just choose not to interact with. And so, this is context specific. Maybe the timing is, one of the things that they mentioned was, you maybe pick your time when you would talk to somebody, oh, well, right after work's not a good time, or right when I get in the morning, get into the office in the morning, I don't want to talk about this kind of stuff. It's place specific. Maybe we choose, again, not a party, not a birthday party, or not Christmas Day or Thanksgiving table in America or whatever. The people that are there. So it's sort of an appropriateness judgment. So we're selectively self-censoring when we make the judgment that it wouldn't be appropriate to share our opinion.
Right. So to give you the same example as that I used earlier, the other Caucasian person at my son's daycare in Tokyo, we both selectively self-censored. Now, if he had have come up with all kinds of critical social justice and was trying to put that on me at daycare, I would have pushed back. But he wasn't. And so I'm not going to engage with him about a discussion on critical social justice. And I'm going to try not to get close to him because I'm being selective about who I talk to, because I don't want to be in a relationship with somebody who is espousing all of these views, basically.
And what if your kids become friends? Then,
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So there's all kinds of issues there that I want to avoid. Now, again, it was kind of funny because he was doing exactly the same thing to me, and actually we agree on these 2 points quite a lot. But it was selective. I think if I had have started trying pushing all of that stuff on him, he probably would have pushed back as well. So it's not misrepresentative. It's not total. It's just like, our kids could become friends. We don't want to have any trouble. The other person may think this way. Maybe it's a good idea not to start talking about these things. Yeah.
So let's see if I can find some of the things, a few of the quotes that people said here. Let's see. I don't see any benefit in terms of my family with like talking about politics unless you don't want them to be like family anymore. So, these are, it's not just about the futility. It's also about, these are relationships that I need to, I need these relationships in my life. Again, it extends, again, to work, maybe neighbors, other kinds of things. So these are relationships that are necessary in other parts of your life. So you might silence around those people all of the time, or you might do it, again, even more selectively, like, maybe choose not to say anything, in some instances in the lunch, when you're sitting around having lunch, but maybe you choose to say something in a meeting that's supposed to be, a brainstorming meeting or a meeting about a topic that is related. So you wouldn't bring it up at lunch, but maybe you would bring it up in a different context. So again, it's sort of an appropriateness judgment.
Yeah, I mean, imagine the kind of situation that gay people in extremely conservative Christian environments face. I've said that conservative Christian environments, from my experience of them, tend to be nice. the community seems to be nice, but if you're a gay person, it's not going to be
Might not
great,
be.
is it?
It might not be.
No,
Yeah.
because they think that there is something inherently wrong with you and your choice of lifestyle. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, of course. I don't think there's any good reason for them to believe that. I think it's wrong, and I think they're worse off as a consequence of thinking that. But nevertheless, that's what they believe. And so if you are born and raised in that kind of environment and you have family relationships, friends, can you express that side of yourself? It would be very, very, I mean, lots of people do. Would you lose your family?
Right. And are you willing
Think about,
to?
are you willing to? Another example is people who, Mormons.
Mm.
I have family members who are Mormons, and that's fine. They're fine with me not being a Mormon. They're in America, by the way, and perfectly nice people. They're Mormons, but it's fine for me to be family members and have relationships with them, even though I'm not a Mormon. But if I was to join the Church of the Latter-day Saints and then leave, the situation would be very different, right? So there are people who have grown up within that church who effectively can't express the opinion, or they can, but they'd lose their entire families if they said, actually, I've decided this is all a load of bullshit, So that's another example of selective self-censorship.
So the authors, then, I mean, they do have a discussion and a conclusion here, but the last sort of section is this idea of walking on eggshells, that the participants are surveilling their environment and trying to figure out whether they could what the opinion climate might be in the moment, and whether their views are a fit, or whether they deviate from the majority in their sort of micro environment. And I also I guess similar to what you talked about before, I kind of liken this. I do think this is very much where I am, and maybe where you are in your life. And I didn't used to be this way.
No.
I did not constantly monitor my environment for whether or not I could talk about something academic, whether I could express my opinion on, department business, curriculum issues, student issues, that kind of thing. And it's exhausting. It's really, really exhausting. And I think that I don't mean to diminish what it's like to be a minority, except to say that if you're a minority who's constantly vigilant in your environment, looking for uh, a microaggression or whatever, I feel for you, because it is absolutely exhausting. And
It's terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had this argument with people, and I'll make it clear here that there are, I believe, as we did in a previous podcast, I believe, I'm not sure I have cast iron evidence for this, but I believe, and I think I have enough evidence to conclude that I'm likely right here, that the critical social justice mobbings, right? And I'm not talking about critical social justice scholars or activists. I'm talking about the people who get involved with the mobbing and the bullying. And that's not all of, a lot of the scholars don't do that. A lot of the activists don't do that, right? So I'm just specifically talking about the critical social justice mobbings. I believe that these people are disingenuous, right? And I don't believe that, like what happened to you, I don't believe that people were genuinely offended by something taken completely out of context. I don't believe that. And I think the whole thing is completely disingenuous. I think that these are narcissistic. They want to make everything about them. They want to pretend that they're offended so that they can gain social status. get resources taken to them, to diverted towards them. I believe that these people are awful. I believe that they're dishonest. There's nothing right about them. That's the people who are getting involved in the mobbing. I'm not saying that applies to all critical social justice activists or scholars. I don't think that. And if somebody was to say this is all critical social justice activists or scholars, I would disagree with them and argue against that point, right? So I'm just talking about the people who are doing the mobbings. We, the people who have been mobbed, are the victims, but we're not the only victims of these people. A lot of the critical social justice true believers are also victims. And I've met these people. They are convinced they will participate in the bullying as well. They won't lead the bullying, but they will participate in the bullying as well because they genuinely have been convinced that people like us are out to get them when we're not. And so they will fight back and attack us, or they will think that they're fighting back. They'll think that they're defending themselves, but they're actually attacking us. But they're the victims. And I've seen these people. I've seen decent people be manipulated by dishonest narcissists into believing, and they genuinely believe this, that the whole world is against them, that racism is coming from here, here, and here, and here. And they show all of the psychological signs that a victim would. They lose weight, they can't sleep, they have anxiety issues. I've seen them crying in the workplace. I'm not crying in front of loads of people in a performative way, by the way. I heard one of them sobbing in her room in isolation when she didn't think that, because she genuinely been convinced that and believed that me and everyone else was out to get her. So these people are the victims too, these true believers of critical social. It's not just the people who are being mobbed, it's the people that have been duped into believing not that racism is real, because of course it is. Sexism, homophobia, of course these things are real, and of course we all need to push back on them. But when you get this illiberal thing where it's all of these unconscious microaggressions on all this is a really unhealthy way of seeing the world. And these people who have been tricked and duped into believing it in that way by people, by the way, who don't tend to show any of these signs, right? They don't show any anxiety. There's all this virtuous victimhood. They don't show any kind of these signs of being a victim, apart from maybe anger. That's it. There's no weeping in their own classrooms. These people are victims too. So yeah, I mean, it's a nightmare for us to constantly have to selectively self-censor, but it's also a nightmare for them as well. It's just a dreadful environment.
So I'd highlighted a few things, here at the end, that just sort of in their conclusion, that our findings suggest that self-silencing is not merely avoiding public censure that might come with speaking out in the public eye. Instead, it's a relationship-bound act that people enact in order to preserve their own peace and friendships, rather than simply to avoid isolation. So people surveil their communities and media messages to assess whether their beliefs are in the majority as they decide whether to speak out. But they also do this within their interpersonal relationships and within conversations on the fly. Surveillance is a dynamic process. And, one of the things that when I teach cognitive psychology, sometimes we, do a little bit on that. We don't have a class specifically on social cognitive psychology, but I do part of that in my cognitive class and if I teach social, because people are not things, right? Things are just sort of sitting there for us to evaluate, and we can pick them up and move them around and see how manipulate them and stuff. But people are not things. They're surveilling us at the same time we're surveilling them. And there's a reciprocal kind of relationship there. And so this idea, and they don't take it any farther than this. That's sort of like surveillance is a dynamic process, but it's constantly changing. And when we're surveilling other people, it is not the same thing as sort of securing the perimeter, right? Where we walk around and make sure that all the doors are locked and the windows are closed. So this is, it's constantly changing. It's changing in the moment. And we could be having a completely honest and forthright conversation with someone who disagrees with us, and we're, having this, give and take or whatever, and a third person, a person can just walk down the hallway, and that can become then a stressful situation where one or the other person feels as though they have to, uh, self-censor, or they want to, stop the conversation. Or maybe that one person would go too far, or say something. It's like, whoa, 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 I'm not going there, kind of thing. It's like, we were having a good conversation, but I'm not going to go there with you. So this constant, again, it's already exhausting, but in this current socio-political environment, it's I think you're right. It's wearing us all down, and it's affecting political engagement. It's affecting people being able to make friends. It's affecting people's levels of it. We have this, explosion of supposed anxiety. I have my own opinions about whether, I think that we're assigning the word anxiety, to things that we shouldn't. But certainly that's what people are defining, and I think that this sort of constant surveilling and figuring out whether or not we can or should speak. And it's not even just in person, right? It's also happening online. We didn't even read an article about, online, self-censorship. But we can imagine, right, that there's this same kind of networked silencing that's going on in this network. I might be able to post something, and there's some concern that it might bleed over, right? That somebody might, I don't know enough about Facebook and Twitter and all that, but you can get tagged, right? And then it would show up in somebody else's feed, and that kind of thing. So there's a concern there that even something anonymous might not remain anonymous, and so on.
Well, I mean, yeah, but also the online bleeds into the personal, right? Like, a lot of these things, they say, well, this is an argument that really, really irritates me. It's like, oh, this is one that Sam Harris is, I don't know what's happening to him, came out with, oh, if you're really worried about all of this stuff, then you need to take a break from Twitter. And there's a little bit of truth to that. Twitter can generate anxiety, and I don't disagree with that. Or I'm not saying that people don't spend too much time on there, and that doesn't create negative consequences. But you don't have to be on Twitter to be harmed by Twitter.
Right. Yeah, I'm not on Twitter, and somehow I got harmed by Twitter.
A lot, right? So a lot of damage was done to you by somebody screenshotting something completely out of context and then posting it on Twitter and lying about it, and you got mobbed. But you've never been on Twitter. You've never typed a character into Twitter. You've never had the Twitter application on your phone. So the kind of argument doesn't work, right? You can be really badly damaged by Twitter and Facebook and numerous other social media platforms, even if you've never heard of them, right? It doesn't require you to be on there to be damaged by them. So it bleeds over. So that's the first thing I'd like to say, in terms of kind of this whole social media people, or people saying it's not real because it's social media. It's very real. Mm-hmm. Not just for people who are on social media. People who are not on social media are being damaged by social media too. You can't just say that because it's social media, somehow it's something less. Doesn't work.
Right.
And I actually think that the argument that people make in that regard is a disingenuous one as well. It's just so obviously wrong that, I don't believe that intelligent people coming up with arguments like that should be taken, at face value. It's obviously disingenuous. The second thing I'd like to point out, it's not just the wokies. It's not just the critical social justice types who are doing this. I've been mobbed by anti-woke people. Right? Like, for example, when I said, okay, drag queen story, this is the example I always use, drag queen story hour. Are there examples of people behaving in an explicitly sexualized way around children? Yes. Should that stop? Absolutely. Does that mean that all drag queen story hour performers are doing the same thing? No, it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't mean that. And we can't just say, here, there's an example of this person, and therefore extrapolate that they're all doing that. We can't do that. That's disingenuous as well. So by me making arguments against what some people would regard as the, authentic anti-woke position, I've been mobbed by anti-woke people. I'm trying to say, oh, you're now a groomer. No, I'm not saying that at all, right? And so it's becoming uncomfortable. And certainly what I've noticed with a lot of people who I would talk to and get along with because they recognize the problems with critical social justice, and they still do. Even some of them who started off like me as liberals, a lot of these people have gone down a right-wing authoritarian rabbit hole, and I can't talk to them anymore. I mean, I can and I do, but it all blows up into an argument. So I can see where, if you're in a position like I am, you might want to selectively self-censor around the anti-woke as well, ironically, because many of them have become what they set out to oppose, in my view. So it's not just critical social justice either. It's, I'd say critical social justice is maybe the inception point. Historically, the McCarthy era was fairly similar, right? Could
Yes.
you easily speak out against them? Again, we've talked about this before, but your neck of the woods, New England, there must have been people in Salem who knew that these witch, right? There must have been, what the hell is going on there?
Yes.
There must have been people there who knew that it was bonkers, but why didn't they speak out? Maybe they did. Maybe they selectively spoke out.
Right.
Maybe they said, I just don't have an opinion on this, or maybe they lied. But this kind of self-censorship, it's a problem that I think in this turn has been caused by critical social justice, is now spilling over into the resistance against critical social justice. But it is a psychological phenomena that predates it and has flared up at other times of history and in other places as well.
And I do think that it's contributing to an intolerance for discomfort. So people are becoming used to not just holding their own tongue, but they're becoming accustomed to other people holding theirs. And so when someone does speak out and it is somehow in disagreement or makes them uncomfortable momentarily, that now we have a basis for calling foul, harm, whatever. So I do think this isn't part of the spiral of silence, but it's the same kind of self-perpetuating system where we have people who are claiming, that the world is harmful and that they don't want to be told, they should not be made to feel uncomfortable, right? And so what do? Well, we worry that this person might feel uncomfortable, so we don't tell them maybe some things that would actually expand their mind or give them something new to think about or whatever, and so then they become less and less able to tolerate any kind of discomfort or disagreement or the word no or whatever. So again, this is separate from the spiral of silence, but I think it's potentially an outgrowth.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's value. I mean, it's short-sighted and childish. I think about one of my sons, right? He loves Minecraft. And so if I say to him, okay, you can play Minecraft for 30 minutes today, or you can play it for an hour tomorrow, he will choose, I want to play it 30 minutes today, always, right? Because he hasn't developed the maturity, that's why I'm trying to help him inculcate the maturity. He hasn't developed the maturity to delay gratification. Right. So he's choosing short-term gratification over medium and long-term gratification. And I'm trying to teach him not to, basically. But this is what we're doing. If we tell, let's say, if my former colleague who was crying all of the time about kind of racism, what do I do? Do I challenge her and say, look, these feelings you have, they're not real, right? People don't feel this way towards you. People don't think that you're any less because, you're of a different ethnicity. It's not real. I'm not saying that there aren't racists in the world, but you catastrophizing and projecting this all around you and seeing tigers in the dark, they're not there. What is the effect of me saying that? Well, the effect of me saying that in the short term is that I cause more stress on her. But in the medium and long term, if I'm able to get through to her, which I wasn't, unfortunately, if I'm able to get through to her, then the benefit will be positive, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what we're doing selfishly and I would say immaturely, and certainly in a very short-sighted way, well, not we, but academic institutions are favoring the short-term,
Mm-hmm.
short-sighted gratification of young people at the cost of, the medium and long-term best results.
Mm-hmm.
They
Absolutely.
can't learn anything. They can't
Yeah.
challenge ideas. They can't unpack ideas. What are we doing to them?
Yeah.
I mean,
I just
it's
talked to somebody.
negligent.
I just talked to some, speaking of negligence, I just talked to somebody Monday, I think it was, whose daughter was believe he said third grade teacher, and she has left teaching, in part because um, of this, and an example. So this is third hand, right? Because he's telling me about his daughter that she couldn't fail anybody anymore. So because to fail someone, even on the smallest of things, you have to document how you tried to prevent the child from failing, what you did in order to do this. You had to report up the chain, so like to a principal or something. Like, you can't give F's. So she was just like, I'm not going to do that. Why am I going to go through that? This sort of a version of self-silencing, right? I'm going to, I'm sort of a total kind of self-silencing. I'm just not going to engage. I'm just not going to give F's anymore, because it's the futility of the process, and then even if you get through the process at the school, then you have to go through it with the parents, and you're not going to be able to change anyone's mind about this. So yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, we can criticize that person for making the short-term choice, right? At the same time,
What about the kids?
yeah, yeah. It's
I'm sorry,
definitely
the
not
kids need to fail.
it's not the ethical choice. Absolutely. And this is why she left the profession, because she realized that this is not, it's not the right thing to do. But she
No.
also just couldn't stick around and fight the good fight, essentially
I mean,
on her own.
you can't learn that you're going to be wrong sometimes.
Maybe not. I know.
So this is what we get when we validate everything, right?
Right.
We're creating psychological disorders here.
Yes.
We're creating a pathology in which people they can't be wrong on stuff.
Yeah.
How can you interrogate the world if you can't be wrong?
Probably 10 or so years ago, a education faculty member told me in the hallway that she never failed any students for any reason because it was cruel, and that it didn't matter because there's a statewide test that all teachers have to take, and so the statewide test would screen them out.
Yeah, but they have a chance to be failed, learn from their mistakes, and then go into the test better armed because you failed them, because you did your job and you told them that they weren't up to muster at that point in time.
Yes.
What are you doing, you coward?
Yes.
That's cowardly and cruel.
Yes.
Like, failure is an opportunity to grow. I mean, Nietzsche was like, this is what the whole point with Nietzsche when he said that which does not kill me makes me stronger. He said that he wishes failure upon people because failure is the opportunity to grow. That's how you get better at something. This is going back to Kant. Again, you can't get good at debating with people or learn philosophy unless you make a fool out of yourself. It's required. It's not optional. You can't get good at psychology unless you've got stuff wrong.
Right.
You can't get good at anything. You can't get good at playing the piano unless you make a load of mistakes and someone points out, or maybe you notice it, or someone points out, that was crap.
Yes.
It's like, what's that silly American show based on an English one?
Oh, that is way too general of a description. Silly American show.
American Idol.
Oh yeah.
In the UK, we had like the X Factor or something, right? It's like you've got those, and everyone, it's really cruel, but you get those deluded people who think that they're really amazing at singing, right? And then they go on there and they do something, they think they're great, and it's absolutely awful. And then they are told that it's absolutely awful.
Right.
And then they have an absolute meltdown. No, it was brilliant. What are you talking about? And then, those people are victims. And I'm not just talking about victims of a TV show that is exploiting people who are mentally ill, right? That too. But those people are the victims of the parents, the teachers who have been around them, who didn't say to them,
right,
look, there's something wrong. You're not good at this.
right.
Because
you need to put your energies somewhere else.
But maybe some of those singers might have actually gone on to be good singers if whoever was telling them they were great pointed out, here's what you've got to do, here's how you can improve, right? Failed them, look, this is bad this time, however, here's how you improve. But if you just constantly validate and gratify people, you end up with a nation, more than one nation, full of people who will go on to embarrass themselves. You're not helping them, you're harming them. It's not good for people to go through something like this. They need failure. Everybody needs failure. Otherwise we have no chance to grow. It's disgusting. It's negligent, and
that's
abusive.
Really, it's really where where the article starts, right? That people who talk to people that they disagree with are more likely to participate politically, be tolerant of others' viewpoints, have faith in democracy, and have empathy for others. So,
and also I would add another one. We haven't got the evidence for this, but I'm fairly confident. Know what they're talking about.
Yes, exactly. Building knowledge. Yes.
Basic knowledge.
Yes. I agree. So, to be clear, also to mention, so we have another article about self-censorship. This one in particular is about this one that we just covered is about opinions and withholding your opinions. It could be knowledge too, but opinions. And the other article is specific. They actually argue in the other article that this is not self-censorship, that self-censorship is only about knowledge that you believe might be harmful, particularly political knowledge in times of either war or other conflict. And so a very different view on self-censorship.
So, for example, if you were one of those people who, during the aftermath of the George Floyd, the beginning of those protests, if you were saying this is going to create a massive Ferguson effect, in which violent crime across the board really, but particularly within African American communities will skyrocket. If you were one of those people who predicted that back then, as I did, or you just believed that was going to happen, did you self-censor? Right? Because you have knowledge of something that you think is going to be true, right? That you think will become factually true. Did you self-censor back then? I mean, I didn't. But that would be how these authors would view self-censorship, I think. Is that fair?
I don't know. I think that they were even more narrowly focused on, on factual knowledge, not even knowledge that could be built, from different, data or whatever. But regardless.
We'll get into it in the next time.
Yes, it's very different, but also a very good article. So
good article, though I didn't think much of their narrowness of definition. But otherwise, it's very good, and we'll get into that. Good. All right. Thank you very much. So to conclude, we've looked at 3 types of self-censorship that is out there. One is total, where you're just like, look, it could be you think, look, if I express my opinion, nothing's going to change anyway, so why would I bother? Or it could be, I expressed my opinion on something and I got mobbed, so I'm just not going to talk to anybody about politics. That's total, very difficult place to be, not very fun. Then there's misrepresentative. This is when you kind of lie and you usually do this in a subtle way. It's not like you're outright, some people will outright manufacture stuff, but you might subtly lie in order to pretend that you agree with something that you might not agree with, or you might just remain silent. This is misrepresentative to kind of create the impression that you believe something you don't believe. And again, this can be nefarious, but it's not always nefarious. You might need to do this, again, if you're a gay person living in a very conservative Christian environment and you've got friends, or you're somebody who's a Mormon who's lost faith and your whole family is still in the church, it might make sense for you to lie in order to preserve those relationships. So it can be nefarious, but it certainly isn't always nefarious. And then finally, there's selective, which is you just choose not to speak to people about certain things depending upon the context. So the example we used was me and my now friend at my son's daycare. We didn't want to talk to each other because we were worried that the other person might be a critical social justice activist. So we're like, hold off.
And also related to sort of time and, picking your time, picking your place,
right.
Sort of a judgment call. Even the same people might choose to speak or not speak in a different location, for example.
Very good. And also the way human beings do this is complex. The way we survey, we're constantly evaluating and reevaluating, who we talk to, when, where, with whom, but also with the knowledge that person may change. They might, we might feel comfortable talking to them about something one month and not the next month. It's a constantly evolving landscape. And I think that's true all of the time, for all people, all of the time. People have always been doing this in this very complex way. I think the point that we kind of ended up on is that while that is true at all times in all contexts, it's particularly true now, that the requirements of self-surveillance in order to avoid being mobbed, it might not be true if you're living in a small Christian conservative town, but certainly if you're working in academia and social media or legacy media or something like that, the requirements are really, 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 really high. And this is creating a very, very stressful time. I think I can link it to a previous podcast by saying that I think that this is being driven largely by dishonest actors who are deliberately trying to seek out sometimes genuine examples of bigotry in order to exploit them, but often also greatly exaggerated, or even, as has happened to the two of us, invented examples of bigotry. And how do I feel confident? This is not speaking as a psychologist. So how do I feel confident in believing that this is likely true? Because the people who do this don't seem to me, again, this is not being backed up by any studies, but this is my opinion, they don't seem to me to be exhibiting any of the typical signs of being a victim.
And I am going to practice self-censorship and not criticize.
No, but you should criticize me. That's what makes it fun. Because I'm much more like coming from a kind of a more kind of philosophical background. I'm more.
We've been through this in the podcast.
We've been through this in other podcasts.
We have a series of 2 podcasts about personality. My main
which you can look up.
My main comment again is that I don't care to engage in demonizing anyone for because they have a particular trait that includes, race and ethnicity and gender and, that kind of thing. And it also includes personality. So I'm simply not, I'm willing to, as we discussed in 2 podcasts, I'm certainly willing to discuss it and everything. I'm simply just not willing to.
No, that's completely fair enough. And we have agreed that, even traits like psychopathy are actually needed. You need big risk takers. Same is true with people who are slightly narcissistic, who think that they're more intelligent than other people and are confident as a consequence. Maybe they are.
Do you think a brain surgeon isn't a dark personality? I'm sorry, but I think they are.
Yeah.
They're
No.
standing
So,
out. They're like, I want, you know what? And I want my heart surgeon to be, to believe that they're the absolute greatest, and because they have my life in their hands, and they
all
should
your
believe.
soldiers ready to
Yes,
kill,
yes,
right?
yes.
So I don't know. Elizabeth certainly isn't demonizing Machiavellian narcissists. Make that clear. I'm demonizing some Machiavellian narcissists, not all of them. If you're a Machiavellian narcissist, we need your psychological traits. Come and join us. Let's put your expertise or your innate powers to good use. I'm simply demonizing the Machiavellian narcissists that get involved with mobbing.
Yes.
That's it. And I think it's fair to demonize them.
Yes. And we should all practice a little less self-censorship.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Because if not, the kind of toxic environments where we're constantly stressed all of the time, about being jumped on by some nasty person and their mob, they're not going to get any better. And the only way to save these environments, these institutions, is to start speaking.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much. See you next time.